It is 2006, and the PlayStation 3 finally made it into gamers' homes. The PlayStation 3 was almost meant to be the be-all and end-all of systems, with it expected to remain on the market for over 10 years, according to Sony themselves. Sony wanted to capture as many people as possible with their new system, including the casual gamer. That's when PlayStation Home comes in. This is a game where you get to live a second life, meeting others, playing virtual games, and much more. This was a life simulator that drew so much attention, became quite popular, yet was swiftly executed by the end of the generation. I am here to say that PlayStation Home did not deserve to die. PlayStation Home was originally intended to be an online lobby for PlayStation 2 title called The Getaway Black Monday, and was going to be known as The Hub. This was actually going to be a 2D online hobby. When Phil Harrison saw the potential for a game like this, he wanted it to become a standalone title that would be much different than what was initially conceptualized. This is when development began on a 3D online virtual world that was set to launch on the PlayStation 3. Due to the PlayStation 3's raw horsepower, developers knew that they could do so much more with this hardware and create a much more ambitious game. In 2007, they announced that PlayStation Home was coming to the PlayStation 3 in just 1 year. Now, it is being touted as being a game where you essentially get to live a second life. If you've heard of this concept before, then the most direct reference a lot of people would likely point to is the game Second Life. This game was also very akin to the Sims games that we all grew up to love over the years, but it was going to be completely online. While a concept like this hadn't really been realized on 6th generation and below hardware, it was now going to be possible on home consoles. And then came December of 2008, PlayStation Home finally launched. Players could now create an avatar and then live an entirely digital life where they can meet others, play minigames with others, and have conversations. You could explore different environments, and the hubs even varied per region. Every region received a different look for their hubs, which made the experience more unique. PlayStation Home even supported voice chat in order to enable players to have live conversations as they walk around and do things in-game. Not a new concept, of course, but one that is especially important in a game like this. You can play this game for free as part of the PlayStation Network service. However, there were multiple issues that arose upon its launch. Lots of players disconnecting from the server at random times, which disrupted gameplay, but Sony even had to remove the voice chat feature just a week after it launched. Even though they eventually brought it back in, Sony eventually managed to stabilize their servers, and gamers were eventually able to start playing without interruptions. And this is when people really started to form a lot of opinions around this game, when they were finally actually able to get their hands on it and play it. There have been so many problems with this game before it ever even launched. As a man who was responsible for getting PlayStation Home off the ground, Phil Harrison left Sony shortly before we got access to the game. Not only that, there were a lot of issues brewing that made for a poor user experience at the beginning. When PlayStation Home first launched, it wasn't an instant success for obvious reasons. In fact, many players had issues connecting to the servers, and if they can't access the game at all, then they obviously can't play it. This was a huge turnoff. The idea behind this game revolves around having many different games inside of this one hub for you to play with your character, but so many things were not really offered here. Lots of missing things like no trophy room, no media share, and game launching still had to be added later on. But even if you did manage to get into PlayStation Home, then you would likely be bored. Downloading worlds was really slow. Rooms would often get filled up before you could even make it inside, which meant that you couldn't really do anything in there. Its performance was lackluster. Gamers believed that they would be able to join much larger rooms of up to 200 people, but these ended up being limited to 50 people, and there were still a lot of frame rate issues. All of these things caused many people who were trying out the game to simply tune out and never look back, as the user experience was quite poor for many. But in spite of all of these issues, Home still retained a solid fanbase. Even if some aspects of the game were broken, there were many people who stuck around for the social aspects. They got to meet a lot of people online, but they were also able to roleplay and pretend to do other things with people. So community was the most important aspect of this game, and that aspect was almost always working as it should. Eventually, the issues that Home had at launch were ironed out. Over time, performance was improved. There was a lot more to do, including many more games to play, and that kept the fan base quite happy for some time. PlayStation Home was launched as a free service, but it was one that brought in a lot of money through microtransactions. They sold costumes among many other things, and they were frequently purchased. Sony even started bringing a lot more attention to the service, which allowed it to remain relevant and remind many gamers that PlayStation Home is in fact still doing well. It seemed like PlayStation Home was finally getting the attention it deserved, and that Sony wanted to continue supporting it. The game was actually fun if you were doing the right things, and many people had no problem paying for microtransactions when it meant that they could customize their characters in a unique way. It was even exciting for a good chunk of the player base because every time they went online, they got to see their friends that they made. However, just a few years later, that excitement was quickly shut down. So little by little, many players realized that even though they did add a bunch of minigames that could be played within PlayStation Home, they weren't necessarily fun. They were interesting to jump into once or twice, but not interesting enough to continue revisiting. Sony did try to support Home as much as possible by adding and even replacing content with new ones in order to keep this service interesting for new and current players. But after some time, their attention started shifting away from Home, or even games like it. Also, this wasn't exactly a place where things were consistently sunshine and rainbows, although not many things in the online space are. Many people who just wanted to troll went online on a consistent basis, which muddied the experience for those who took the game more seriously. Not that it necessarily deterred them from playing, of course, but those who are more casual jumped ship much more easily. The PlayStation 3 was a very capable console that attracted many audiences, particularly hardcore gamers. It was clear that Sony was shifting their attention towards titles that represented these types of players more, so they slowly spoke less and less about PlayStation Home, until they simply stopped talking about it entirely. With the PlayStation 4 on the horizon, many wondered if Sony would continue to support PlayStation Home throughout the next generation. As player numbers were diminishing by the end of the 7th gen, the writing was on the wall. Unfortunately, Sony decided that instead of supporting it further, it would be better to just shut it down. This meant that many people were going to lose access to everything that they paid so much money for, which upset many home players. While this was a big loss in terms of overall value, I believe that the most important, or rather significant loss, was probably in the many friends that people made through the service. But truth be told, the player base was so small by the end of 2013, when the PS4 launched, that not really many people cared. But here's the short of it. PlayStation Home did not deserve to die. It was a novel idea with an extremely dedicated player base, even if it wasn't the biggest one out there, and the potential for it to continue growing was there, with it even supporting user-generated content and simply the fact that it seemed to be quite profitable. This was a platform that was used as a substitute to true social interaction, and many took it seriously enough to make actual friends. This was a significant loss to that dedicated player base, one that was genuinely and lovingly supporting this game before its eventual shutdown in 2015. And seemingly, the community behind it absolutely agrees. There's a community server where you can homebrew your PlayStation 3, then you can access it and play just as you did before. This is such a wonderful revival to a platform that was abandoned by Sony, and many people who enjoyed PlayStation Home back then can still re-experience it today. This project is called Destination Home, and they deserve so much credit for what they've done. PlayStation Home was a service that a lot of people at least tried, as by the end of 2010, Sony reported that up to 17 million people had at least played the service, and in total, over 40 million people had registered for this game. The issues with the current service and advancements towards focusing on the hardcore gaming experience would inevitably kill it towards the end of the generation. As a consumer, it is difficult to justify the service dying, as there were such passionate people behind it, and how dedicated players were to it. But from a corporate and even commercial perspective, it understandably had to die, as it was difficult to picture a future for this game back then, especially with a dwindling player base. But it doesn't diminish the impact that this game had on so many people, who formed genuine friendships, and even if the service couldn't continue to exist under Sony's umbrella, it could exist under the community's watch. So if you had to say goodbye once, now's your chance to say hello once more. But there are so many Sony-related topics to discuss, and I'm still gathering topics related to their services and hardware. While the PlayStation 4 mini documentary will come out once everything is in order, there was that time when Sony wanted to address the Wii's motion controls directly, as well as Microsoft's incoming Kinect. We will talk about this one very soon, so subscribe so that you don't miss that mini documentary when it comes out. Now, thank you so much for watching. Leave your suggestions in the comments for future bite-sized documentaries, and until next time.